I'll start by saying I didn't see it coming, not really, not until I did. It wasn't one of those slow realizations where you connect the dots over weeks or months. It wasn't a gradual sinking feeling. It hit me like an unexpected downpour in the middle of a clear day, the kind that soaks you through before you even realize what's happening. Maddie said, "I'll be back later," and I, in a moment that now feels almost cinematic in its cruelty, replied, "Don't rush, there's nothing here for you now." And with that, she was gone. I stood there in the doorway long after her car disappeared down the street, my knuckles pressing into the frame hard enough that I could feel the blood pounding in my fingertips. It wasn't until Max, our golden retriever, let out a low, uncertain whine that I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled a long, shaky release that felt like it took something with it, something solid, like the last bit of certainty I had about our life. For the first hour after she left, I paced the living room. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that Maddie was probably just stressed or meeting a friend. But her smirk, that deliberate flick of her eyes toward the door as she grabbed her purse, gnawed at me. There was no apology in her voice, no explanation, no warmth. It was cold. Clinical. Like she had already written me out of her life and was just waiting for me to notice. I sat down on the couch and opened my laptop, almost out of muscle memory. Work emails, social media, a few half-hearted clicks on random websites, but I wasn't really looking at any of it. My mind was back at the door, at the way she'd left, at the sudden shift in her behavior over the past few weeks. The long hours at work, the phone that never left her side, the gym bag she now carried with her everywhere, things I'd brushed off as harmless were now glaring red flags in my mind. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for her laptop. It was on the kitchen counter, the screen dimmed but not locked. I opened it and it was there. The messages. Hundreds of them. It wasn't even hidden. Messages from someone named Nathan, filled with emojis and comments about how he couldn't wait to see her again, how last night was perfect, how she made him feel things he hadn't felt in years. Her replies were worse, teasing, suggestive, full of inside jokes and private references. She wrote things to him that she hadn't said to me in years. Maybe ever. I closed the laptop, but it was too late. The damage was done. My hands were trembling, but not from shock, it was fury. Not just at her, but at myself. How long had I been asleep at the wheel? How long had I convinced myself that Maddie's late nights and her sudden disinterest in everything we shared were normal? I was the fool who thought we were still building something together while she was laying bricks in someone else's house. The front door opened again sometime around 2 in the morning. She walked in like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't been gone for hours with no explanation. Maddie kicked off her heels, dropped her bag by the stairs, and looked at me with this casual, dismissive glance that made my stomach turn. "Hey," she said, not even meeting my eyes. I stood up. My voice was calm, too calm. "Where were you?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged. "Out. With friends." "With Nathan?" I asked, the name sour on my tongue. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "Don't lie to me, Maddie," I said. "I saw the messages." For a moment, she froze. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she rolled her eyes. "So what if you did?" she said. "What are you going to do about it? You're just going to sit here like you always do and pretend everything's fine because you're too much of a coward to actually leave." That was the moment everything snapped. Not just the pretense of our marriage, not just the fragile hope I'd been clinging to, but me. The part of me that had believed we were a team, that Maddie was just going through a rough patch, that we could fix this. It all shattered. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stood there, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me, and realized she was right. I had been too scared to confront the truth, too afraid to see her for who she really was. And she didn't respect me for it. She never had. But that night I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit there and pretend anymore. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me with her lies and her smug smirks. I was done. And that was only the beginning. The morning after was almost too quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words Maddie had thrown at me the night before echoing in my head. "So what if you did? What are you going to do about it?" Her voice had been so cold, so devoid of any guilt or remorse, it chilled me to the bone. I didn't go to work. I called in sick, my voice cracking as I lied to my boss about a headache. Maddie, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She was up early, already dressed in one of her tight, casual outfits, her phone clutched in her hand as she sipped her coffee. She barely glanced at me as I sat across from her at the kitchen table, my hands gripping a mug of black coffee so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When she finally acknowledged me, it was with a smirk. "So, are we just going to sit here all day, or do you have something to say?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I stared at her, feeling the words pile up behind my teeth, but I couldn't find the right ones. How do you tell the woman you love that she's a stranger now? That everything you believed about her was a lie? That she'd turned into someone who didn't even flinch at betraying you? You lied to me, I said finally, my voice low. You cheated. And you don't even care. Maddie leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You're so dramatic, she said, rolling her eyes. It was just some fun. It's not like we were going anywhere anyway. That stung more than I thought it would. Not going anywhere? We were married, Maddie. We built a life together. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You built a life. I just lived in it. Maybe if you'd paid more attention, you'd have noticed I was done a long time ago. Her words were like knives, each one slicing away at the image I'd held of her, of us. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her see how much she'd hurt me, but I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the weight of her betrayal settle over me like a heavy blanket. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirk, heard her voice taunting me. I could practically hear her typing messages to Nathan, laughing at how pathetic I was for staying, for not kicking her out. But as the hours dragged on, something in me hardened. The sadness was still there, a deep, throbbing ache in my chest, but it was slowly being replaced by something else, determination. I wasn't going to let her do this to me. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me while she played her little games. If she wanted to treat me like a doormat, she was in for a surprise. The next morning, I got up early. I packed a bag, not for her, but for me. I wasn't going to stay in that house, suffocated by her lies and contempt. I needed space to think, to figure out my next move. As I zipped up the bag, Maddie came downstairs, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. Where are you going? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. I'm leaving, I said simply. I need space. Away from you. She blinked, then scoffed. You're being ridiculous. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm not being a liar. She didn't respond. She just turned away, heading back upstairs, probably to call Nathan and tell him I'd finally grown a spine. But I didn't care. I was done playing her games. And that was only the beginning. I didn't just leave. I walked out of that house like I was shedding a skin, like I was dropping the weight of every lie Maddie had ever told me. I left her standing there at the foot of the stairs, phone in hand, staring after me with that mixture of contempt and disbelief. Like she couldn't fathom that I might actually choose to walk away from her. The air outside was sharp, cool against my skin, and for a brief moment, it felt like I could breathe again. Max followed me to the door, tail wagging uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure whether to stay or come with me. I knelt down, scratching behind his ears. Stay, buddy, I whispered. I'll be back for you. I left him because I knew Maddie wouldn't hurt him, at least not directly. He was the one innocent thing left in that house, and I couldn't bring myself to drag him into the mess I was about to face. I checked into a cheap motel a few miles away, the kind of place where the wallpaper peels and the lights flicker. It was all I could afford, and honestly, it felt fitting. The room smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarettes, but it was mine, and it was quiet. For the first time in what felt like years, I could hear my own thoughts. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. The temptation to text her, to call her, to scream at her over the line was almost overwhelming. But I didn't. Instead, I opened her messages again, scrolling through the conversations she thought were private, watching the words blur together into a sickening knot in my stomach. Nathan was older than I expected. His messages were full of arrogant charm, little jabs at me. Does he even know how lucky he is to have you? I bet he's clueless, poor guy. Maddie's responses were worse, laughing, teasing, playing along with his digs at me like it was some kind of game. It wasn't just physical with them. It was mental, emotional. She wasn't just betraying me. She was mocking me behind my back. I don't remember when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, it was to the sound of my phone buzzing. Maddie. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. What do you want? I asked, my voice rough from sleep and disuse. You're overreacting, she said immediately. Come home. We can talk about this like adults. Like adults. I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? Running around behind my back. Lying to me. Making me look like a fool. Her voice sharpened. Oh, please. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a fling. You're blowing this out of proportion. I felt something break inside me. A fling. I repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? What do you want me to say? She snapped. It's not like you were giving me what I needed. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. There it was, the cruel, cutting truth. The admission that it wasn't just about Nathan or anyone else. It was about her, about the fact that she saw me as weak, as lacking, as disposable. "I'm done, Maddie," I said, my voice steady now. "I'm done with you, with this marriage, with all of it. Stay with Nathan. Stay with whoever you want. Just don't expect me to be waiting when you come crawling back." I hung up before she could reply, the finality of it echoing in the silence of the motel room. My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't fear or sadness. It was something stronger. Determination. I didn't go back home. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face her smug smile, her dismissive shrugs, her casual cruelty. I needed to figure out my next move, to reclaim my life from the wreckage she'd left behind. And that was only the beginning. The motel room was stifling, thick with the scent of old smoke and regret. The longer I sat there, the more the walls seemed to close in, pressing against my chest like Maddie's smirks echoing in my head. It wasn't enough to leave. I needed to know how far the rot went, how deep the lies burrowed. I logged into our shared bank accounts, the ones we'd built over the years, vacations, mortgage payments, weekend dinners at overpriced restaurants. It was all there, a digital trail of our lives. But then I saw the withdrawals. Large sums, neatly spaced apart, each one just under the threshold where I might notice. Maddie had been siphoning off money for months, quietly emptying the savings we were supposed to be building together. It wasn't just the money. There were charges to places I didn't recognize, fancy restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in nearby cities, expensive gifts that had never made it to our house. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd been systematically dismantling our life behind my back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something, to break through the suffocating fog of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, breathing in slow, ragged pulls, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I thought back to the last few months, the sudden shift in her mood, the way she'd grown cold and distant. It all made sense now. She wasn't just distracted. She was preparing her escape, laying the groundwork for a life that didn't include me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from her. "You're being ridiculous. We can fix this if you just calm down." I didn't reply. Instead, I threw the phone across the room, watching as it bounced off the stained carpet and skidded to a stop. The screen didn't crack. I almost wished it had, so I'd have a physical representation of the fracture that had torn through our lives. By noon, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to stay in that motel room, wallowing in misery while Maddie continued to manipulate and mock me. I was going to confront her, not with anger, but with calm, measured truth. I was done being the fool in her game. I drove back to the house, each mile a countdown to the inevitable clash. I didn't even feel nervous anymore. I was past fear, past sadness. All that was left was a hollow resolve. When I walked through the front door, Maddie was there, lounging on the couch with her legs draped over the armrest, her phone in hand. She glanced up, her expression a mix of boredom and irritation. "Well, look who finally decided to come home," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I stood there, letting her words wash over me. "I know everything," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic." "I know about Nathan," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the money, the hotels, the dinners. I know you've been planning this for months." For a split second, her mask slipped. I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes before she composed herself, crossing her arms over her chest. "So what?" she said coolly. "What are you going to do? Cry? Beg me to stay? You always were pathetic." Her words hit like a slap, but I stood my ground. "No, Maddie. I'm not going to beg. I'm not going to cry. I'm done. You can have your new life, your new man, your stolen money. I'm walking away from this mess you created." She sneered. "You're not strong enough to leave me." I met her gaze, holding it until she looked away. "Watch me," I said, my voice a low, steady promise. And with that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. And that was only the beginning. The air outside was sharp and bracing, cutting through the haze of the confrontation. I didn't look back as I stepped off the front porch, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of color that seemed to mirror the weight in my chest, but for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something resembling clarity. I drove without a destination, letting the roads wind past strip malls and gas stations, the car's engine humming beneath me like a steady heartbeat. My phone buzzed once, twice, but I didn't check it. I knew it was Maddie, and I didn't need to hear her voice, her excuses, her attempts to pull me back into her web. Instead, I pulled into a small diner just off the highway, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who called you Han. I ordered a coffee and sat at the counter, staring at the dark liquid as if it held the answers I couldn't find in Maddie's lies. I thought about the early days when she was still Maddie, vibrant, laughing, pulling me into her orbit with a gravity I couldn't resist. We'd been young then, foolish, full of plans that felt solid and real. I remembered the late nights, the whispered promises, the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. And now it was like those moments belonged to someone else entirely. The waitress refilled my cup and I nodded in thanks. I thought about the bank accounts, the stolen money, the messages. I thought about Nathan, his smug texts, his name sitting in her phone like a brand, a mark of her betrayal. It wasn't just about the affair. It was the contempt, the disdain she'd shown me, the way she'd laughed at my pain, dismissed it like it was an inconvenience. I realized then that I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just walk away and pretend it hadn't happened. I wasn't a man who could be discarded, erased from her life like an old message. I needed closure, not for her, but for me. I paid the check and got back in the car, the decision settling over me like armor. I wasn't going to beg and I wasn't going to grovel. But I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. Maddie had taken enough from me, my trust, my pride, my peace of mind. It was time to take something back. I drove home slowly, the sun setting in streaks of gold and crimson behind me. When I walked through the door, Maddie was waiting. She was dressed now, makeup perfectly applied, as if she was expecting someone, or maybe she just wanted to project the image of control she always clung to. "Back so soon," she said, her voice smooth, her smile brittle. I didn't answer. I just stood there, looking at her, seeing her for what she was. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. "I'm moving out," I said finally. "I'll have my things packed by tomorrow." Her smile faltered. "Oh, come on. You're being ridiculous. We can work this out. You're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting," I said, my voice sharper now. "I'm done. You can have the house, the lies, the life you built with Nathan. But you don't get to have me. Not anymore." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her face shift, not with anger or mockery, but with something that looked almost like fear. It was fleeting, gone in an instant, but it was there. I turned and walked away, up the stairs, into the bedroom where I'd spent countless nights wondering where she was, who she was with. I started packing, my movements mechanical, focused. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving the man she'd made me into, weak, uncertain, afraid. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, the house felt different. Quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Maddie was nowhere to be seen, but I heard her phone buzzing somewhere downstairs, the sharp trill echoing through the silence. I could imagine her ignoring it, wrapped in a silk robe, maybe still texting Nathan, maybe calling her lawyer, maybe figuring out how to spin this into a story where she was the victim. I didn't care. Not anymore. I packed the last of my things, my clothes, my books, the few personal items she hadn't thrown into storage bins or stuffed into the garage. I left the framed photos of us on the shelves, the wedding album gathering dust in the closet. Those weren't mine to take. They were hers now, relics of a story that had ended long before I was ready to admit it. I called a friend, Ben, an old college buddy who'd always had my back, even when I didn't deserve it. "Can I crash at your place for a bit?" I asked, my voice raw. "No questions," he said. "Just get here." I loaded the boxes into my car, Max sitting patiently in the passenger seat, his head resting on my knee. Maddie's car was still in the driveway when I pulled out, but she didn't come to the door. She didn't even try to stop me. I imagined her upstairs, sipping her coffee, scrolling through texts, already rewriting the story in her head. I left without saying goodbye. Ben's apartment was small, cluttered, but it felt like a sanctuary. He didn't ask for details. He just handed me a beer, clapped me on the shoulder, and let me sit in silence while Max curled up at my feet. That night, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the events of the last few days playing over and over in my mind like a film stuck on repeat. The shock had worn off, replaced by a simmering anger, not just at Maddie, but at myself. How had I missed the signs? How had I let her convince me that everything was fine while she was building a life with someone else? I thought about the money she'd stolen, the lies she'd told, the way she'd laughed in my face when I confronted her. I thought about Nathan, his smug texts, his name echoing in my head like a taunt. I wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning I called the bank. I froze the accounts, canceled the joint credit cards, and set up fraud alerts. Maddie wouldn't be draining another cent from me. I called a lawyer, explained the situation as calmly as I could, and set up a meeting. Divorce papers. A restraining order if necessary. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything, not without a fight. And still, she texted. You're overreacting. We can fix this. Come home. Stop being childish. I didn't reply. I was done playing her games. But that afternoon, she showed up at Ben's apartment. She pounded on the door, her voice sharp and demanding, until Ben opened it and told her to leave. She screamed, cursed, threatened to call the police, but he stood his ground. Eventually, she left, her heels clicking down the hallway, her voice echoing with curses and promises of revenge. I sat there on the couch, my hands trembling, but not from fear. From fury. And that was only the beginning. Days passed like molasses, slow and bitter, but I didn't waste them. Every morning, I woke up in Ben's cramped guest room with Max at my side and a weight in my chest, but I got up anyway. I called the lawyer again, sent every piece of evidence I had, the bank records, the screenshots of Maddie's messages with Nathan, everything. The lawyer said we had a strong case, but I knew this wasn't about a courtroom victory. This was about me taking back control, piece by piece, from the woman who tried to erase me. Maddie didn't stop. She texted constantly, shifting tactics like a chameleon. First, she played the victim. I messed up, but we can fix this. Please, don't ruin us over a mistake. Then she turned cold, blaming me. You pushed me away. You made me do this. You were never enough. And when that didn't work, she tried threats. I'll take everything. I'll make sure you regret this. You'll be sorry you ever left. But I wasn't listening anymore. I'd finally seen her for who she was, and I wasn't about to be dragged back into her web of manipulation. One afternoon, I came back to Ben's apartment to find a thick envelope waiting on the kitchen table. My name was scrawled across it in Maddie's handwriting, messy and aggressive. Ben said she'd stopped by while I was out, dropped it off, and left without a word. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos, not of us, but of her and Nathan. Candid shots in restaurants, at a beach, in hotel lobbies. Photos that were clearly taken without my knowledge, proof of how long she'd been flaunting this affair, how deeply she'd sunk into her lies. There was a note, too, scrawled in her jagged handwriting. This is what real love looks like. You never had a chance. For a moment, I felt the familiar rush of rage, the tightening in my chest, the bitter taste in my mouth. But then something strange happened. I laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but a hollow, disbelieving one. She thought this would break me. She thought this would be the final blow. It wasn't. I gathered the photos and stuffed them back into the envelope, then set it on the counter. Ben, I called. You know any good shredding services? That night, I sat down with Max and finally wrote Maddie a message. It wasn't long, just a few lines. Keep the house. Keep Nathan. Keep your lies. I'm done with all of it. I won't fight you for what you've already stolen. But don't contact me again. If you do, you'll hear from my lawyer. Goodbye. I hit send and blocked her number, deleting the thread so I wouldn't be tempted to look back. The silence that followed was almost deafening. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the smallest flicker of peace. And that was only the beginning. The silence after blocking Maddie wasn't just quiet. It was profound. The constant stream of her manipulations, the mind games, the twisted narratives, all gone in an instant. For the first time in what felt like years, I could sit without the weight of her presence pressing down on me, choking the air out of every room. But peace was fragile. A thin shell over a deeper turmoil. Ben was supportive, offering me his couch, a spare key, even an old bottle of scotch he'd been saving for a special occasion. But I couldn't drink, couldn't numb it away. The pain was sharp, clean now. The fog of denial had lifted, and all that was left was the raw wound underneath. A week passed. Maddie stayed silent, but her absence didn't mean she was gone. I saw her shadow in every corner of my mind, heard her voice echoing through my thoughts. The moments we shared, or the moments I thought we shared, twisted into lies under the harsh light of reality. One afternoon, as I walked Max through the park near Ben's apartment, I saw a familiar car parked along the curb. Maddie's. She wasn't inside, but I knew she was nearby, watching, testing the waters. I didn't confront her. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just kept walking, head high, Max trotting along beside me like a silent witness to my quiet defiance. That night, I called the lawyer again. I needed the divorce papers expedited. I needed this chapter closed. The door slammed shut so she couldn't slither back in. A few days later, Maddie made one last desperate move. A voicemail. Her voice was thick with false remorse. Her words carefully chosen to sound sincere. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Please, let's talk. Just one more chance." I didn't listen to the whole thing. I deleted it halfway through. She wasn't sorry. Not really. If she had been, she wouldn't have lied so effortlessly, stolen so brazenly, betrayed so completely. I wasn't the same man she thought she could control. I met with the lawyer the next day, signed the papers, initiated the process that would legally separate me from her, from the mess she'd created, from the lies she'd wrapped around my life like chains. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was necessary. When I left the lawyer's office, I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, the city bustling around me like it hadn't noticed the collapse of my world. But I noticed. I felt lighter, not free yet, but on the path. That night, Ben and I sat on his tiny balcony. Max sprawled between us, watching the city lights flicker. "You're handling this better than I thought you would," Ben said, his voice low. I shrugged. "I think I'm done being the guy she gets to break." And that was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and the slow, painful unraveling of what I had once believed was a life I could trust. Maddie's name was still on the lease, on the bills, on the threads of the world we'd stitched together, but I was cutting her out one thread at a time. She tried once more to reach me, not with words, but with a letter slipped under Ben's apartment door. It was written in her hurried, familiar scrawl, but the tone was almost laughable. She pleaded for understanding, blamed her actions on stress, loneliness, and even me. There was no real apology, just an elaborate attempt to shift the guilt onto my shoulders. She even hinted that Nathan wasn't serious, that he was just filling the gaps I'd supposedly left. I didn't even finish reading it. I crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the trash. The Maddie I'd loved, or thought I loved, was gone. And this letter was just a last-ditch grasp at control she no longer had. But her reach extended further than I'd expected. I got a call from my boss, who told me Maddie had shown up at my office, causing a scene in the lobby. She demanded to speak with me, claimed she needed to set the record straight. And when they told her I wasn't there, she left in a flurry of insults and half-muttered threats. I realized then that she wasn't going to let me go quietly. Maddie was the type of woman who couldn't stand losing, especially to someone she thought she had wrapped around her finger. I called my lawyer again. We filed a restraining order, something I'd hoped to avoid but now saw as necessary. I gave the office security her photo, told them not to let her near me, and changed the locks on my old place, even though I wasn't living there anymore. But it wasn't just about Maddie. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my peace. I went back to the house one last time, to pick up the few remaining things I'd left behind. Maddie wasn't there, or if she was, she stayed hidden. The house felt cold, hollow, like a shell that had once held a life but now contained only shadows. I took what was mine. My father's watch, a box of old photos, Max's favorite toy, and left without looking back. Driving away from that house, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. I was leaving behind more than walls and furniture. I was leaving behind a version of myself that had been blind, naive, too willing to forgive. And that was only the beginning. I left that house for good, and as I drove away, I felt the finality settle in my chest. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a step away from the prison Maddie had built with her lies and betrayals. Ben welcomed me back like nothing had happened, and Max lay at my feet, his quiet presence grounding me. I spent hours on that couch, staring at nothing, feeling the exhaustion in every bone of my body. It wasn't just physical. It was the weight of years of being dismissed, undermined, disrespected. Maddie hadn't just cheated. She'd hollowed me out, chipped away at my confidence, made me doubt everything I thought I knew about love and trust. But here's the thing. I survived. The divorce papers were filed. The restraining order was in place. and Maddie's texts and calls dwindled into silence. Word got back to me that Nathan had left her. Whether it was because of the mess she'd made or because he'd gotten bored, I didn't know. I didn't care. Maddie was left with the wreckage of her own making, and I was finally out of the blast zone. I started rebuilding my life, slowly and quietly. I focused on work, on reconnecting with friends I'd drifted from because of Maddie's constant demands for attention. I took Max for long walks in the park, let the quiet moments heal the parts of me that had been broken. I wasn't the same man I'd been before Maddie's betrayal, and I never would be, but maybe that was a good thing. One night, a few months later, Ben and I sat out on his balcony, sipping cheap beer and watching the city lights flicker. He clinked his bottle against mine and said, "You did it. You're finally free." I nodded, a small, grim smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah," I said, "I did." And in that moment, I realized something. Maddie's betrayal had been brutal, but it had forced me to wake up, to stop being the man who let himself be walked over, lied to, and used. I had learned to stand up for myself, to value my own worth, to demand better from the people I let into my life. To anyone reading this, if you're going through something similar, if you're stuck in a relationship where you're made to feel small, like you're not enough, listen to me. Get out. Walk away. It won't be easy, and it'll hurt like hell. But on the other side of that pain is clarity, and strength, and a version of yourself you forgot existed. I left Maddie. I let her lies collapse around her. And now I'm finally free. That was the end of her story in my life, and the beginning of mine.